going to do my video on Jack the Ripper, and I'm going to get right into it. And as usual, I am going to use my footnotes and everything, so my videos will get better as time goes on. Please bear with me. But right now I'm using all my footnotes so that I can be very specific on things. There's a lot about Jack the Ripper that you don't normally hear on the TV. So today I'm going to get right into it. So Jack the Ripper, obviously we know he was a serial killer that operated around the Whitechapel part of London, England in the years 1888 to 1891. But he was also known as the Whitechapel Murderer and Leather Apron, and you'll kind of find that out later on where he got his nicknames from. The Ripper would kill London's prostitutes and women of low status, and he frequented the overcrowded slums of the East End. His typical MO was to slice their throats, and then he would remove their organs and harshly mutilate their bodies. Police concluded pretty quickly that this person might have some medical knowledge by how precise some of the wounds were. Some of them were really jagged, but it seemed like he knew something about medical knowledge. This is what the police concluded. And it's very important to note how scared people would be during this time period, because these are women of the 1800s. Women were so much different. They needed to be protected because that's how society was at that time, specifically, like even more. And they were more genteel. So they were really at risk. So after a while, people thought that the police weren't doing a good job because these women were prostitutes, and they were thinking, oh, well, the police don't really care about them because, they're women of ill repute. But then it just started creating mass chaos where all the women were afraid. Men were afraid too. And I'm going to get into many murders that happened before Jack the Ripper and after, and how maybe when that abrupt stop of the murders happened, maybe he wasn't caught necessarily, maybe he just went into hiding. So, and as the police are getting all sorts of crank mail, they received a letter entitled Dear Boss. The word boss referred to the police, and in this letter is where the killer gave himself the name Jack the Ripper. So he named himself, and he taunted the police and would mock them, and he went so far as to say that the last victim, he used blood from hers to write this message to the police, or he tried to, but it congealed, so red ink will have to do. So the guy was like a true psycho, and he says the next time he would clip the lady's ears off and send them to the police. Then there was another letter known as From Hell letter that was sent to George Lusk, that was the chairman of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, in October 1888. The letter was sent with half a preserved human kidney, because he said the other half of the kidney he ate. So at this point, the cops know they're dealing with a major psychopath. And there was very brutal murders before these Jack the Ripper murders, but these 5 murders that I'm going to speak of in particular were the ones that the police really honed in on, that they knew at least these 5 were committed by the same guy. But at this point, at least 4 women were murdered and mutilated in the Whitechapel once they got this letter. And Spitalfields, they're 2 different districts in London. In this letter, the Ripper vowed to send the ears of his next victim to the police. So the police had been getting through so many theories. They had considered that there could be more than one person, and that there could be a traitor within the police department, because they had police towards the end. They had police stationed everywhere, and nobody could understand how this guy was getting through, and how this woman were being attacked, and how it seemed like they were letting their guard down, or it was somebody that they knew, because he was so ferocious, so quick, so efficient, and always got away. Nobody could understand this. They listened to psychics, mediums, people who claimed to have special knowledge, and at this point the police were extremely frustrated. They probably regretted not taking the first murders seriously enough, maybe because they were prostitutes, that had they paid attention to things in the beginning, maybe they could have saved more people more quickly. So now these crimes were very uncommon back then, so people were in a frenzy, and everybody was at a heightened vigilance. Even people who went out at night to the theater or whatever, whether they were well-to-do people, because it only seemed like they were women of low status, well-to-do people or not, they were scared. Everybody was scared. For whatever reason, Lusk, the chairman of the Vigilance Committee, did not immediately report the kidney. Supposedly he thought it was a crank. Like using a kidney from a medical school to try and trick them or be funny. So he didn't even report this until later, which makes Lusk kind of look really suspicious. When the kidney was finally tested, don't forget they didn't have the technology that they do now. They found that it belonged to an alcoholic and somebody who had died within about 3 weeks, which corresponded directly to the woman Catherine Eddowes, which was one of the last murder victims. While all this is going on in a certain area, Emily Marsh had a visitor at her shop at Mile End Road. He was an unsettling man, that's how he was described as, that asked for the address of Mr. Lusk, and he wrote the address down and left. His description as follows: a slim man wearing a long black overcoat about 6 feet tall. He had a distinct Irish accent and a dark beard and mustache. The letter was written in very poor English, which would suggest that the man was probably of very low background. However, some people thought that his illiteracy might be faked by the certain letters that were misspelt, that it was somebody who knew the English language and was pretending that they didn't. So there's a lot of theories. The police believe he either surprised these women very well or that he knew them. The Ripper was, some people thought that the Ripper was on the police force and that he could even be connected to the Masons, and I'll tell you why later. So there was a point in time where their writing was wiped off. There was writing by one of where the bodies were found, and the police captain ordered for it to be wiped off because it said something about the Jews. The Jews, it was spelled Jewes, and there's a whole theory behind that. I'll get to that as we come there. The Ripper had already admitted to being a cannibal, so the police knew they were dealing with a psychopath. There were a few people the police had on their radar for a while. A mental ill quack doctor who had encounters with the law, had a strong dislike for women and a knack for collecting body parts, and was Irish. His name was Francis Tumblety. After his arrest, the police couldn't find any hard evidence and had to release him on bail. He died from a heart issue in 1903. Another suspect was James Maybrick, because he made references in his diary as though he was the Ripper. Then they suspected his brother Michael Maybrick because of what they deemed was suspicious about him. There was a lot of things in that general area where a lot of people were being accused of possibly being the Ripper, anything that was out of the ordinary. But some of these people really did have either weird lives or weird mannerisms, so they were rightly on the police radar. And because his wife was accused later on of murdering him, there was a whole conspiracy behind that too. So he did die, and then basically he was off the radar for a while. So things didn't go so well for the Maybricks either, because later on one of the children, they changed their name, and then when he was at work, that child drank cyanide accidentally and killed himself without knowing. So that family almost was like cursed. Just weird things happened to them. There's a lot of stories like that, everybody associated with Jack the Ripper. He was a suspect for, he was also famous for doing the music to the popular hymn at that time called the Holy City. There were actually vicious murders between 1888 and 1891, but there were so many before and after that made the Ripper murders not as unusual as you might think. Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly were all the 5 victims that they believe are connected to Jack the Ripper. The wounds were always the same: deep gashes to the throat, extensive abdominal mutilation, as well as severe mutilation to the private parts, organ removal, and facial mutilations. The 5 victims police positively identified were called the Canonical 5 that Jack the Ripper was responsible for. Mary Ann Nichols was the first victim discovered on August 31st, 1888. She had been seen alive 1 hour prior. She had been discovered by a former roommate, Emily Holland. Her throat was severed by 2 deep cuts which almost completely decapitated her. Her private area was stabbed twice, the lower abdomen was ripped open, and the bowels were protruding out. It's important to note the area had significantly changed to the present, so it's difficult to recreate some of the crime scenes. So even what they do present day, it's hard. Annie Chapman was found on Saturday, the 8th of September of 1888. Her throat was also slashed by 2 slash marks. Her abdomen cut open completely. The inside of her stomach was placed under her left shoulder, and another part of her flesh and her small intestines were removed and put underneath her right shoulder. Her uterus and sections of her bladder and private area were removed. So this guy took the time to really hack up this woman, to completely disfigure these women. It was like to be as disrespectful as possible. An eyewitness saw Elizabeth Long and saw Annie standing outside 29 Hanbury Street at about 5:30 a.m. with a dark-haired man wearing a brown deerstalker hat and dark overcoat. He had a shabby but genteel appearance, and you'll see as time goes on how all the witnesses have some really weird ways that they describe him and how he always has an unsettling presence. Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes were both killed on the same day, the early morning of Sunday, September 30th, 1888. Stride was discovered at 1 a.m. in Whitechapel. She had an incision 6 inches across her neck that severed the left artery and trachea and ending beneath the right side of her jaw. So no other mutilations were done, but there was speculation that he was interrupted, and that's why he killed twice that day. So there's a lot of, and I apologize about this, this is a lot of like graphic information of how vicious this was, something that you would not expect from the 1800s. You expect that present day. Eyewitnesses that saw her speaking to a man earlier all had conflicting stories. Some said that he was fair, some said he was dark, some said he was poorly dressed, some said he was well dressed, which would indicate maybe this man is a really good con artist and he's a really good change artist, and he has different appearances that he uses. Catherine Eddowes' body was found in Mitre Square, London, 45 minutes later. Her throat was slashed ear to ear, her abdomen ripped open, leaving a jagged wound, and her intestines were placed over the right shoulder. One part of the intestines were detached and put between the body and the left arm. The left kidney and a big part of the uterus had been removed. Her nose was cut off, the cheek slashed in vertical cuts 1/4 of an inch in size through both eyelids. Whoever this is, the police determined has an extreme dislike for women, which is very obvious because no man in his right mind, no matter how angry or vicious he wants to be, would ever do that to a woman, especially present day, even a woman of ill repute. Women are weaker, and back then, even if you're a bad woman, you would have to be a true psycho for a man to inflict that much pain and that much disfigurement on a woman. Triangular incisions pointing upwards toward her eye was carved on each of her cheeks, and the lobe and part of her right ear were found in her clothing. The police surgeon determined this type of mutilation would take at least 5 full minutes. So this is somebody who's sick and enjoying all this. And then there's another man, Joseph Lowendy. He passed a narrow walkway named Church Passage and described seeing a fair-haired man, medium build, shabby appearance, with a woman that could have been Catherine. So there's a lot of different sightings, and everybody's panicking, and they're getting different measurements and everything for this man. And the police at this point they're trying to go door to door. They're asking people. They're very frustrated. And then there's this Ripper guy who keeps sending these messages to the cops and taunting them. A part of Catherine's bloodied apron was found near an entrance to a dwelling on Goulston Street in Whitechapel, with a chalk inscription above the apron that said, "The Jews," spelled Jewes, "are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." Very bad English, wrong spelling. They believe that it could be cryptic Masonic writing. Then the police captain comes over and says, "Wipe it off. There's enough anti-Semitism over here." But people believe, because he was a Mason, that there could have been something else at play here. And it's also important to mention that it's one of the head-ups of Scotland Yard, I believe it was, that he died a short time after this whole thing with Jack the Ripper blew over, and he claimed that he had like the information that would really lead to an arrest, whoever it was. He really had some information. And then like the police raided his house, and he died like within 3 weeks or something of that time period. I don't remember if he was murdered or he died from a heart attack. I don't remember the whole thing because I used so many different sources, but this has been documented on some different shows, as well as, different internet, different books, different things. And it's very important to know, because a lot of people don't know that about that man that claimed he had all that information. And then that happened with Scotland Yard, and then he's dead. So some people believed it was Queen Victoria's son. They thought it was the royalty. And what is interesting is the disemboweled body of Mary Jane Kelly, who was somebody else. She was one of the worst ones. She was found beyond recognition. The throat was severed to the spine. Her uterus, kidneys, and one breast was placed under her head. Other organs were placed with parts of her abdomen and thigh on a table near the bed. The heart was completely missing, and that was not the only victim that had the heart missing. Some of them before Jack the Ripper and after had some really weird similarities, but the police kind of determined they weren't sure, because it seemed like some of the qualities of the killings didn't match up to everything that the Jack the Ripper was actually doing. It had appeared that a recent fire had been lit to illuminate the room while the killer sadistically killed his victim, and they believe that there's a couple of victims that weren't completely strangled before he did all this to them, so they might have felt pain. And I believe they definitely have pictures of the victims, but the only real crime scene, I believe, when the body was actually there was that last one woman that I mentioned, where it is beyond I used to think that it was a drawing. That's how brutal it looked, like a sketch. And it's disgusting. It's truly a psychopath. So this must have scared the living daylights out of people back then. All five of the murders were done on or close to a weekend at the end of the month, or maybe a week after. Some have seriously speculated that there may have been one or more killers, a lookout, and the actual killer. There is speculation that the royal doctor was involved because he might have covered or been an accomplice to the murder, because one time people had said that there was the royal carriage speeding away with the crest on it, and that they actually saw the doctor and somebody else with him. There were different stories about how they had seen him covered in blood, clearly running down the street, and you could not mistake that that was him. So the royalty did not want to hear of this either. Queen Victoria didn't want to hear of this stuff about, Albert and her family, etc. So Queen Victoria said, no, I think it's one of the butchers that were across the street, because they interviewed a bunch of butchers around that area, because the butchers would have access to that area. They could cut across the courtyard and get to where they needed very quickly, and then come back, and they could have blood all over them, but it would look like they're just the butcher doing their work. So they had some really good alibis, a lot of these people. Then all of a sudden the murders stop, and then there's some murders that happen afterward, and people were like, oh, well, what, is this really related to Jack the Ripper or not? There was the Pinchin Street torso, which was the legless torso of a woman aged between 30 and 40 years old, and she was found beneath a railway arch in Whitechapel. She was beaten before being mutilated, and her abdomen, mutilated. Another woman discovered by P.C. Ernest Thompson was a 31-year-old prostitute, Frances Coles. Her throat was deeply cut, but the victim was different. She was still alive, and this is something that you never hear about. She was not harmed in any other way, but she died before medical attention could get there. So the police determined that Thompson might have scared the bad guy away, and that's why he didn't finish killing her. Then again, Thompson could be a bad guy. There was a lot of things that the cops were trying to get to the bottom of, and they did know that the woman had argued 3 hours prior to with another man, so they arrested this man named Sadler. His last name was Sadler, but because of lack of evidence, they had to let him go. There were so many people that the police had to let go. So there were some other cases before the Ripper murders, and there was another woman who she suffered numerous stab wounds to her legs and lower torso. She was discharged, but then she died a short term later on March 31st from apparent natural causes, probably from the wounds that or a good scare or whatever. But these were really weird things that happened after the Ripper murders, things that you don't hear about, that no, things didn't just die down. They happened around London and area, but people didn't know, didn't want to cause a stir again. The police were scared, their reputation, etc. Then there was the Whitehall mystery. A headless torso of a woman was discovered in the basement of the new Metropolitan Police headquarters, which is interesting because some people believe that it could be the police that were involved, or somebody dressing up like the police, because some of these women had to have trusted the attacker or just never suspected it at all. Then a young boy, the only man that I've ever heard of, it's actually a boy, that was killed, was a 7-year-old boy that had gone missing on December 27th. His legs were severed, abdomen open, intestines partly drawn out, and his heart and ears were removed. The boy's employer was arrested twice for his murder due to insufficient evidence. He had to be let go. And with some of these people, when their heart was missing, they never found the heart. So whoever this was a true psycho. Another woman, Carrie Brown, was strangled and mutilated. An ovary was actually found on the bed. The police offered a $500 reward. More than 2,000 people were interviewed, 300 people investigated, and 80 people detained. The Assistant Commissioner, Robert Anderson, was on leave in Switzerland between September 7th and October 6th. And this complicated the case even more because they needed experienced people who the police department would respect, and that the regular citizens would respect. And this guy's on vacation, and they're dealing with all this stuff by themselves. Queen Victoria thought the Ripper was, like I said, a local butcher or a cattle drover, and there were other famous people around the area that were actually accused, possibly of, they were suspects. One of them was the very famous Lewis Carroll, the author. So after much investigation, speculation, door-to-door inquiries, private detectives, mediums, etc., no one was ever brought to justice. There was so much speculation on so many different people. There was things about when the the royalty was put into, they said the one royalty, he was angry because he caught an STD, and that he would somehow be angry at these women prostitutes, and that might be a reason why he would start killing these women or whatever. But as you can see, there's no way to get around this case. It's very graphic. It's horrific. It's something more that you would see present day. Kind of reminds you of like one of those MS-13 things today, and yet it's unsolved. And people from present day now, police are trying to recreate the scene. They try and go back and find who this may be, and there's a lot of theories, and they feel like they've narrowed it down to a few people present day, but still nothing they do can pinpoint out on anybody. And the royalty, and even today the royalty does not want to hear that they were even suspect. And a lot of people think that there could be a really good cover, because nobody would want the royalty, nobody would suspect that. And what would a royal carriage be doing in a bad neighborhood like that, unless they just didn't want the reputation of that maybe one of the royals is with somebody of ill repute. So who knows? You tell me. Mention in the comments what you think. Let me know. If you have any other information, subscribe to my channel, Remote-Backroad-Jungles, with a dash in between each word, and my link is www.youtube.com/@hiddenoasis-secret pathfinder. And let me know if you want me to do any videos on anything else. And see you next time. Hope that you enjoyed this video. Hope that you found it informative, and let me know if you found out any other information, or if you found things that are conflicting that you think are interesting, that you have a theory of who Jack the Ripper was, why did he do this, where did he come from, and where did he go after some of those murders subsided for a while. Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you until next time.